we went back and took a look, of course, at what President Trump himself has said over the period of days that David was describing. I want to play for you what that has sounded like over the course of the last several months. Let's watch.
They want to make a deal.
And they want to make a deal so badly.
They want to make a deal so badly. I do see a deal in Iran. It's looking very good that we're going to make a deal. This process should go very quickly. We're going to end that war very quickly. We're in the final throes of what will be a very, very good deal. And they want to make the deal a lot more than I do. We have our deal done with Iran, and it should be successful. We're making an amazing deal with Iran. They want to make a deal with us very badly. They're dying to make a deal. They're giving us a lot. They want to make a deal so badly.
Jonah Goldberg, on that note, I mean, what kind of deal has the U.S. gotten out of this?
There's no deal. And even the MOU wasn't it was a deal to talk about coming up with a deal that was going to last 60 days that was never going to be extended. Look, I think I'm glad that this is happening, in the sense, not that I'm happy for war or anything like that, but this was always a fiction that it wasn't going to end up like this, because the Iranians were determined to control the Strait of Hormuz. The reason why this kicked off, it's the Iranians' fault, it's not the Americans' fault, is that there was a separate corridor close to the Omani coast that the Iranians didn't want to establish the precedent that you could go through any route other than ones the Iranians dictated. And their plan was after 60 days, because the MOU kind of says they could, after 60 days, they were going to say, okay, now there's an Iranian toll booth, pay us every time you want to use the Strait of Hormuz. That's unsustainable. That would have been a massive strategic failure for the United States, so better to reveal the fiction. But there is no strategy here. There is no plan. This may work out well for the United States in the long run. It may not. I don't think it will, but whatever. But you cannot say, oh, well, this is all part of Donald Trump's plan, because there never was one.
Congressman Peter Meijer, I want to play what Joe Rogan had to say about this earlier this week, just because it underscores some of the splintering among people who had supported the president over this as we come back around to it yet again. Let's watch.
I'm going to it up by going to Iran. I mean, this war is not something anybody that's conservative wanted. Most people don't want it, except supporters of Israel. They're the only people that seem to be thinking it's a good idea in this country. Most people are horrified by the idea because Trump was elected. One of the pillars that he stood for, apparently, was that he doesn't want any more wars.
So, Congressman, would you dispute anything that Joe Rogan said there?
The most charitable interpretation you can give of President Trump's comments of kind of no new wars is the idea of the wars being, let's not have a repeat of what we had in Iraq. Let's not have a repeat of how Afghanistan ended. Venezuela was clearly not that. Iran, for, yes, disruption to global energy markets. Gas prices went up about $1.25 at their peak. Now they're about 20. They
went up like 5 cents in the last day or so.
Let's not do the old wars. Let's do the new ones in a new and wonderful, terrible way. I mean, I understand that this is the best defense you can give at this point, but the fact of the matter is that, we are, as everyone who understands the Middle East have predicted, that this was never going to end up in any other way, as my colleague here, Jonah, has said, other than this way, which is that it was unsustainable. The MOU was really nothing more than just a piece of paper. And now we are at escalating tensions. And, the thing that I'm always stunned at is the capacity of the stock market and the oil markets to just sort of like have amnesia and then have the same kind of thing play out over and over again. But this is very dangerous. At the end of the day, we can make a joke about it, but this is extremely dangerous. This is a very volatile part of the world, and each bomb that's dropped, that means people die.
David Sanger, if I could bring you back in here, the congressman, Joe Rogan, not the congressman, was talking about supporters of Israel backing this war. And I know our Betsy Klein had to go spend some time with our friends at CNN International, but she also was reporting that President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu spoke today. Can you speak a little bit to where things stand right now with the Israelis in terms of all of this? Because that also is, I mean, there's some significant political ramifications here at home for Israel and for supporters of Israel. But how is it playing out right now in the international space?
I think historians of the Israeli-U.S. relationship are going to be digging way into these past few months, because it started in January and February with those two men, President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, really side by side. And Prime Minister Netanyahu helped convince the president, along with David Barnea, then the head of the Mossad, that if they joined together in this attack, then the Iranian government would just collapse. And it would be a matter of days or weeks, but they wouldn't be able to handle it, that Iran was incredibly weak. And the president went along with it, then discovered the Strait of Hormuz got closed, then didn't have a plan for that. The split with the prime minister widened as the president tried to find an off-ramp to this. The prime minister is perfectly happy to keep the conflict going until they can strike the Iranian missile sites, many of which are unhit or have been rebuilt since they've been hit, and can get at other Iranian infrastructure. So there's a real division right now between the American objectives, which is get the strait open and get out of this thing, and the Israeli objective, which is they don't really care about the strait, but they do care about disarming Iran.
I have a question about whether either side is truly serious about these negotiations. And I ask it because, from the U.S. perspective, of course, there were talks before Operation Midnight Hammer last year. U.S. went ahead with military action. There were talks before the start of this war. And now, of course, the ceasefire has been broken, really by both sides here. But from the Iranian side, they certainly were in no hurry to make serious concessions here. Do you see the ingredients at this point, even if they stop shooting tomorrow, for actual progress in the negotiations?
Jim, I do, but I do disagree with you. Both sides didn't break this accord. The basic agreement, which Trump was criticized for being too pro-Iranian, you'll remember a couple of weeks ago, was at two levels. The first level, immediate, they let all other ships out. We would let all Iranian ships out. We would let them sell their oil. In fact, we let them sell it in dollars. And there would be a ceasefire, not only in the Gulf, but also in Lebanon. And remember the bullying Trump had to do to Netanyahu. Trump delivered on all of that stuff. The Iranian ships sailed. They sold their oil. The ceasefire occurred in Lebanon. All the Iranians had to do was to carry out Article 5 of this 14-point agreement, which was make arrangements with best efforts to let free flow. They didn't. They not only tried to block the flow, they started shooting at ships, thus violating the ceasefire. Trump went through that once, struck back. The Iranians seem to have backed off. Then again, 2 days ago, they started hitting ships again. And Trump launched a pretty severe escalation, hitting bridges and other strategic targets.
Let me ask you this, though, because I'm not going to certainly defend Iran's conduct around the strait, but there's a lot of reporting that the language around who controls the strait and to what degree left some interpretation by both sides. Was the language clear enough as to what next steps were or what was required of both parties?
Good point, Jim. This is a crappy agreement in terms of how it was negotiated in the language. But nonetheless, a serious agreement that ends a conflict, each side has to give some trust to the other. And the first thing you do is, does the other side live up to what a reasonable person would say its commitments were in that first phase? Certainly Donald Trump and the United States lived up to that, as I just mentioned. Certainly the Iranians did not. They're hiding behind best efforts, make arrangements and such. Who knows what that language is? But it was clear to everybody in the diplomatic negotiations that at a minimum it meant letting ships sail out. And at a minimum it meant stop shooting at things. They didn't do either. They violated both.
Okay, I want to ask you about the broader sense of progress, what was gained, what hasn't been gained since the start of this war, because as you know, there's a lot of criticism of the war, even not just from Democrats but Republicans, that the president's aims have not been met. And frankly, some of that criticism is coming from U.S. allies, Israel included. But you made a point in a piece for the Washington Institute that when viewed from a broader perspective, that Iran has lost a great deal, and not just since the start of this war, but going back a number of years post the October 7th attacks. Can you make your case for that?
Certainly, and I first rely on the State Department, which in April put out a justification for what I would call this campaign beginning on February 28th of what has been a conflict between Iran and its proxies, Israel initially, the United States brilliantly under the Biden administration came to Israel's defense. Other countries got involved. Turkey pushed out Assad, Iran's man in Damascus. We had fighting with the Houthis in the Red Sea, then the strikes on the Iranian nuclear facilities in Fordow a year ago. So it's been an ongoing conflict. Iran today has lost almost all of its surrogates or proxies. Hamas and Hezbollah are in a ceasefire with Israel occupying part of their territory. The Houthis and the Iraqi militias, you notice, sat out this last conflict. And Iran has had most of its nuclear facilities and its highly enriched uranium bombed either to bits or, in the case of the uranium, buried under a lot of rock. So Iran is basically out of options with one important exception, and that is, of course, closing the straits, which is what, even after they agreed not to continue doing it, they're doing today.
President Trump at the NATO summit effectively declared victory on the nuclear issue, declaring Iran denuclearized, saying that the highly enriched uranium, which he called nuclear dust, I believe, is inaccessible, buried underground, in effect claiming, it seemed to some degree, that a large portion of his goals regarding Iran's nuclear program have already been met. Is that accurate? Is that true?
Like many administration statements, by this one and by ones that I was in, you have to pass the words. The Iranian nuclear infrastructure has been largely smashed, destroyed, scattered, or buried. But they have the knowledge, and most of us believe they have the intent to create a nuclear weapon, or at least the threat of one. And so unless you get an agreement, and of course that is what the ceasefire agreement laid out, a 60-day negotiating period to actually get real commitments by Iran, similar to probably what we got in 2015, to halt long-term Iranian development of a weapon or the weapons capability. And as long as you do not have that kind of commitment from the Iranians, they can dig down in the rubble and they can present a danger to all of us sooner or later.
Ambassador James Jeffrey, appreciate having you on.